I didn't think I'd be on an academic path. It's just where activism took me. I enjoy a lot of the things I do, so I am very much having really engaged conversations with people like, "Hey, what do you do with your PhD?" And it's really interesting to learn what people do because there's so many different routes outside of the university walls. There's people who are freelance researchers, people who do contractual work, people who work for amazing charity sector orgs, and just brilliant work, and also like digital nomads who I'm really interested in at the moment. So
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am so excited to welcome Chantelle. I just so excited. I wish we were in the same room, but because we're just across town.
yeah.
Yeah, but how are you doing? And yeah, do you want to tell people who you are? I kind of put two titles for you, but yeah, give people an idea of who you are.
Amazing. Hey, thank you for inviting me on. So, my name's Chantelle. I am a PhD researcher. I'm an educator. I am a writer, and I'm also a counsellor.
Amazing. And that's a counselor with two L's because I was like, yeah, I
Oh yeah, a councillor.
counselor.
So as in a member of council. I'm also the mayor of my town. I always forget that one. So I'm the mayor as well.
Oh, which town is it?
It's Halewood, which is a small town in Knowsley.
Okay, perfect. And that's kind of near Liverpool for anyone joining us from farther afield. um, so yeah, I met Chantelle at one of the probably protests. So I knew you first as an activist, but I mean, now, you've been doing so much research, and I think like few years ago I recommended you to some individuals for research, for doing speaking engagements, things like that. Yeah, I'm just wondering because I mean, I don't know how old you are and when you started your PhD, and I'm not going to ask that question. um,
With a black woman's age.
no, never. I would never. But yeah, do you want to tell people about how you came to, starting an academic or starting a research career? How did that come about? Because maybe your research career even started before you started doing a PhD. We forget that so many people are researchers before they start doing that. So yeah, how did you come to the research field?
No, absolutely. And for those interested, I am a touch older, so I was a mature student. And I do feel like my activist and my academic path have kind of run parallel alongside each other and along the same timeline. So before I went to study at uni, I was in the police and I had horrendous experience of racism and misogyny in the police force. I tried to challenge it, but as many people who know who've worked in the police force, it's very difficult to challenge it. And ultimately, it was not a place for me that I felt I could do any good. So I left. I started my own business just because I didn't want to be an employee anyway. And I also started university. And I did criminology and sociology for my undergrad and criminology and social policy for my master's. And within that space, I really found a space where I could understand a lot of the injustices I'd experienced both in life and in policing, a lot of the injustices in the criminal justice system, and also a space for change and a space to influence that change and to have a voice and to speak to policy and to speak to all of those people with lived experience. And I was like, okay, this is a really transformative space. So around the middle of my undergrad, I started to I set up a BLM group when after what happened to George Floyd happened. So my activist kind of profile really took off nationally. And I was continuing to study, but I am also care experience, which means I grew up in care. So a lot of the things that I was researching at an undergrad level even were things that I was really interested in on a personal level, social justice issues. So my undergrad research was around care experience, and then my master's research was around Black political engagement, and that kind of coupled with the activism helped me to see how Black voices and the voices of people of colour weren't always heard in political spaces, and how important it was for us to be in those spaces and those spaces of decision making. And so around the time of my masters and beyond, I started to get involved in politics and eventually became the first Black woman to hold the positions that I hold now, town councillor, borough councillor, mayor, all those things. And when I started my PhD, I also teach in this department, so I teach in the School of Education. That was really lovely because, as again, when we talk about the academic journey, my kind of pathway, especially around the guest lecture scene, was really different. So I was like paradoxically studying for my undergrad and like being invited to Durham to go and give a guest lecture or to go and speak to people, and really speaking from this space, this perspective of expertise, and being invited into these highly academic spaces to either give guest lectures or to consult or to speak to students, and really seeing academia as a space for that transformative change and that conscious raising, but also being on the union side of academia as well and being really active in the trade union space, supporting academics who are out on the picket, and then being invited to things like teach outs and you know, to protests and pickets and all of those things. So there was this real political angle to my academic journey that was somehow tied in with activism as well. So I've always seen them as kinds of strands of the same social justice fight, and they all have the place. So my thing has always been, why can't those things coexist? Because activism informs politics, and quite often academics inform both of those spaces, and you always see those three kinds of people in those spaces. So it's not unusual to see politicians and activists in academic spaces. It's not unusual to see vice versa, everyone in all of those spaces. But quite often the academics and the activists are trying to get the politicians to see things from the perspective of those who these decisions are likely going to impact negatively. So those three identities have sort of ploughed along, and what I'd say is, as some have taken more of my attention and more of my time, others have kind of had to have less time. So at the moment, I'm 2 years into my PhD, which again is around care experience young people. It's looking at their educational journeys, because there's quite big educational gaps for that cohort, and it's really important to understand it. And I'm also holding this political role where a lot of the stuff that I have learned and know like is very useful to the roles I hold, especially being on children's committees and scrutiny committees and things like that. But the boots on the ground activism is probably the least visible part. But I'm like, I am being an activist, I'm writing chapters, and I'm really contributing to the social justice movement, just in a different way.
I love that. And one of the first books that I got when I left academia was June Jordan, My Life as Activism, I believe it's called. And I just read that cover to cover every single day, and sometimes showed it at interviews for academia to kind of be like, you know, I'm going to be an activist before you offer me a job. Like, I kind of was using it as like a shield. But yeah, I don't think that actually works. But I did want to ask you, so your work, and I know we have like a list of questions, but now I have so many other questions. So your work is really multidisciplinary, right? You've got the education, social education, the policy side, the activism side, obviously, but like criminology can't house all of your ideas, I feel. And I wonder how, you know, because I was just listening to a podcast yesterday where they were saying that economics, oftentimes when you open up an economics book, it doesn't say anything about politics, which I find very interesting. And I do feel the same about psychology and our social sciences. A lot of times don't talk about the word politics, might not be in an intro textbook, for example. How do you get these? Do you find that a challenge to navigate not only your different identities in real life, you know, like how you hold different identities, but even in academia itself, within those four walls, is that difficult?
Well, yeah, I mean, the beauty of being a councillor is that you're only a councillor when you are acting as a councillor. So when I'm just around university and doing the activist thing, I'm very much acting in a personal capacity. But I do find it interesting, and I'm very lucky here because I get to teach on things that really align with my interests. So I teach on some social justice issues for young people, some contemporary issues, and one of the things I teach about is political engagement for young people, and we explore things like, okay, what's a political space? Are all these people stood outside Parliament engaging in politics, or are these people stood outside a voting booth engaging in politics? Actually, they both are. It's just different strands of politics. So I really do find I'm able to use all of that knowledge in the space. And also make people aware of how politicized spaces are. So, for instance, the fact that young people today have to pay thousands of pounds to come to university is the result of political decisions made under the coalition government back in the 2010s. That's a political decision. A lot of the things that are being debated around what we can and what we can't teach, although higher education is a little bit insulated at the moment, but there's active debate about CRT, there's active debate about the gender critical theory and all of those things. That's a highly political debate. So those things aren't separate issues or separate strands, but it is really important to maintain those separate identities. So I am very much like, when I'm in uni, in an academic space, I'm acting as an academic. Maybe my activism might be drawn in for that perspective. Maybe politics might be drawn in, but that's kind of those separate identities. I do find that I dress quite differently as well, depending on what space I'm in. So I have a wardrobe of blazers whenever I'm in the council, and I'd say my activist wardrobe and my academic wardrobe could swap and change between each other because they're quite similar. But I do think it enriches that perspective, and it enriches anything that I'm contributing to, and it is definitely, especially for the research that I'm doing at the moment, because a big part of the research focuses on care leaver pathways, and a lot of the experiences of care experience people who are leaving care systems in terms of what finance they're entitled to, housing, social support, social workers, every single aspect of the aftercare that they receive is directly linked to policy. So the so interconnected, it's only enriched what I'm doing as an academic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's so interesting. I mean, do you ever get, I mean, yeah, I'm wondering about when you're writing about your research, and when you're doing critical discussions with people who are academics, whether you are ever asked, and maybe criminology is different, or, and maybe I don't know that much about it, but do you ever get asked why you're bringing in a particular political thing when you're writing about a sociology topic or a social science topic, and whether you're really being like unbiased in your research, or do you get any of those kinds of questions?
No, absolutely, and I'm always, especially, I always go just as a disclosure. This is my role outside of an academic space, just because I want to be completely transparent. And then we always provide a really broad spectrum of political views. So we always make a point of showing Tory and Reform perspectives, just for balance, because we always have to balance. And I think that kind of almost a disclosure of interest is really important. So especially for my current research project, there's a real big reflexivity angle about, okay, I'm care experience, but I'm also, even though it's not in the capacity of this research, I'm also a politician, and that will always inform my knowledge, and it could potentially inform my perspective. So I think having that open and honest conversation, so regardless of whether I'm like, this is absolutely enriched my perspective, it's really important, especially when we think of power dynamics and how you might be viewed regardless of care experience. It's really important to consider, okay, what's my positionality here? What is my role? Even if this is, I am a councillor outside of this space and outside of this role, how might that role be perceived? And just, I think, as with all things, the best thing to do is be transparent. Because I don't even always notice it. It sort of slips into your speech almost a little bit. And I remember I was having a discussion with my supervisors about one of my lit review chapters and some of the bits in there. And one of them went, I forgot that you were a councillor until this moment. And I don't know what I'd said, but I must have said something that sounded like councillary. And he was like, I genuinely forgot. And then we had this really broad discussion about, like, it's really like, it's an asset to the research, but it's really important to conceptualize that from the outset, that while I am a researcher, I also kind of almost have this insider knowledge of policy and how decisions are made and how things are impacted. So yeah, it is really interesting, because for me, I'm just like, I'm Chantelle, I've always been this person, but you forget how those roles or those letters or those titles or even, the megaphone can influence how people see you. Like, one thing I do as well, which is a little bit random, is I tend to not have, I've got colourful hair now because it's the summer and I've been to a festival. But I tend to not have me like really colourful hair in when I'm teaching, almost like I'm Superman and no one knows it's me. And I remember I was talking about it was one of my lectures about activism and politics and political engagement for young people. And one of the students pulled the phone up with like a picture of me protesting. And went, "That's you!" And I was like, that person's clearly got blue hair.
And different glasses.
I know, and no glasses. It can't possibly be me.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I can see like, so you have an insider perspective of like what's possible, what's the history of politics, you know, especially with your work and activism as well. You have to know the history, you have to know about what's worked in the past. And where the field, you know, where things are going, and having your kind of like eye and ear to the ground as well, and that kind of grassroots you know, way that you've worked as well, which I think really works well in research. But are there any other kind of like assets that you were thinking of when you were talking about those assets, like any skills that you're like, wow, it's really great that I had this to kind of bring me up before?
No, I'm kind of, it's really the stuff that I've learned in the past 5 years, the learning curve that I've had and the trajectory that I've been on. It would be so difficult to pinpoint any one element, because even before I was elected into political space, for instance, when we were launching that campaign against the police crime sentencing and courts bill, I was having to sort of almost rapid learn policy. At that time, I didn't know how a bill was pushed through Parliament and the different phases. And yet we were having to map out which MPs we wanted to target. And then when it went to Lords, who were the Lords who were likely to be sympathetic to people having a democratic voice, how we were going to get hold of them and agree for them to try and make these amendments. And so I would say the political element to what I do probably emerged, and this is probably why I then went into politics most strongly, through activism, because it was almost like realising all roads, everything we're fighting against. And, you know, under this, it was under the Tories, and there was some horrendous pieces of legislation coming through for migration, coming through around democracy. A lot of these strands were leading to the door of Westminster, and so it was almost like, what do we do? And I always remember the moment, because I wasn't actually that interested in politics. And I knew it, you know, I was asking politicians to do things, but I saw myself as an activist, and that was a very different identity to a politician. And while I do think a lot of people would hope that I would adopt the identity of a politician fully and just be a little bit more quiet, it's not quite happened yet. But one thing that I was constantly realising was this like rock against a hard place. It was constantly coming up against politicians who just weren't really that bothered. And so like it was really refreshing that some of the people I had contacted and kind of my name had got out there, I was then approached. So I was approaching that, do you want to stand for my first position? And that was on the basis of me being really active as an activist. And I kind of really rate that, because now in the community, I come across people who are so passionate about their communities and so passionate about issues, and you want to see that in political spaces and decision-making spaces. And I always say to them, get involved in politics, like get around the table, put your name in, stand for election, because they're the kinds of people we want to be in these spaces, actual change makers. So I think the political element absolutely came in through activism, and that's the connection that people should make, that activism is inherently political. It's just a more accessible political space for many people.
Yeah. Do you find, I've been like mulling this over since I interviewed Camila last time for the podcast, and, you know, about trust, right? Like, I think during the pandemic, you know, a lot of people talked about trusting experts. We see a lot of like reduction in diminishing of expertise. And there's a lot of distrust also around politics. So, how do you feel that? Is that something that resonates with your experience? Or do you feel like because you were so embedded in your community, that trust was kind of like, we know Chantelle, we know that, you know, she's there for the right reasons. Is that, how do you kind of navigate those?
No, I think it's difficult because you're a representative of a party, and while obviously I'm speaking in a personal capacity, people will sometimes say, "Well, you're just like if you're wearing a uniform or a lanyard. Well, you're this organisation," and you kind of have to be like, "Okay, look at the things that I'm campaigning on, look at the decisions that I'm making, and also look at how I'm being really critical of my party and saying." Do better for working class people, please. So it is, but I think that people do think they can approach you and you will listen. So I have a lot of people with some absolutely key and crucial issues who are like, I've come to you because I've seen you do this, I've seen you be really passionate in this space, and I actually think that you're someone who will not just listen but do something. And that's all I have ever said and all I've ever wanted to do. So when the most frustrating thing for me was supporting sometimes politicians who asked maybe for an endorsement or some support when they were campaigning, and then when it came to an issue like racism or a key issue, and you knocked on that same door and said, "Hey, you know me, who helped you get into this position? Could you just look at this issue?" And they're like, oh no, I'm much too important for that now, you small person." And I always was like, I'm never going to be that person. If anyone emails or gets in touch with me, I'm going to try and get back to you 100% and help you in any way I can. And, a year down the line, I'm really glad to say that I've stuck to that. I am accessible. I've not used my role to create this distance and be really, I'm above all that, because I think essentially people elect you to represent their interests, and it's important that you do that, even if it's an interest that might make you, standing up for an injustice might make you unpopular. It's not always popular to stand up against racism in this current climate. It's not always popular to stand up for women's rights in this current climate, but we must continue to do so.
Yeah, that's amazing. I want to clap for you right now. And I remember, like, I think we probably met on one of the picket lines for the union, trade union, and I think it's so important to be in both of those spaces, to be in the activism space and, like you said, speaking out when things are, because, part of the reason why I was on those picket lines was because of racism that I was observing in my organization. And I was like, okay, I can't have this, So I think, it is really difficult to stand up. But I think, what are the kinds of, because I've been thinking about how much people might be thinking, what kind of skills do you need to be good at politics? And how those kind of how could you move from one to the other? Or maybe are there skills that you're learning in academia that are kind of adding to your political skills? Like, how do those overlap? Do you see any skills that overlap in those?
I think the biggest overlap is with activism, because I'd say activism is a lot faster than politics, and maybe academia. I don't know if you can hear that
Yeah.
alarm.
There you
Sorry. I can stick my headphones in if it can. See how we get on with that.
go. Let's say. Okay, good. They stole the car already and they're gone.
Yeah, they're gone. It's fine. My headphones also didn't plug in properly. So your question was around what has sort of helped me gain the skills.
Oh yeah,
So
what
I would
skills
say
overlap?
activism helped me get that understanding of the significance of politics and also those political processes, as in what they look like from the outside. Academia taught me to slow down a little bit, because activism is very fast paced and you're like, now. And it's fast moving and it's on the ground. And to be honest, my ADHD loves activism. There's lots of shiny things and there's always something to run towards, and I like that. Academia is slow, it's thorough, it's reading the fine print, it's report, it's the nuances within reports, it's the distinctions, it's the cautious language. That will really prepare you for politics, in terms of you get a lot of reports. Like this week, I think I've had 5 meetings and maybe 6 40-page or 50-page reports to read with various bits of data. And so academia prepares you for kinds of the slow pace and the attention to detail in political spaces. But I'd say the thing that puts you in the best space as someone who is navigating politics is just goes into personal skills, because you can learn the report side, but that ability to connect with people on a human level, to be able to listen, to be able to hear their side of the story, to be able to counter an argument. You might not agree with someone, but it's important to hear what they're saying, and also to be able to debate in a way that is respectful. Again, that's a skill that's massively taught in academia. You debate a lot of key issues, you stand up, you present your ideas, and you defend those ideas. And that's a skill that is transferable because you might not agree with what somebody has said, and also there might be a bit of misinformation, but how can you inform someone of that without being rude and whilst remaining respectful and whilst still trying to maintain a relationship with someone who represents them? And I would say those skills are very useful and are often learned in higher education spaces. We don't always teach them in mainstream schools. We don't teach those skills. So yeah, higher education is really good for those debate, those engagements in ideas, opposing narratives, and presenting them in a way that we're not all falling out and fighting each other at the end. So yeah, there's so much crossover in so many of the roles, and each role has taught me something different.
Yeah, I love the way that, I mean, that was so clear the way that you explained it as well, about this slower pace, being critical, using your critical analysis skills, and then being able to debate and create an argument. What is your sense of academia in terms of, because, it is slow paced, there's a lot of critical analysis. And the other thing that's really slow is getting publications out. So the impact is sometimes delayed if you're kind of waiting on reviewers and satisfying all the reviewer comments. How do you feel about, what's your sense of academia as a whole? Are you looking, what's your long-term plan? Are you looking to stay in academia? Is it really about getting that impact out there into policy? Do you have a sense of your kind of 3-year, 5-year plan?
So something that I've really valued in academia is the impact that concepts and theories that academics have created and contributed to have in spaces like social justice. And I'll give you an example there. So last year, obviously almost a year to next week, we had some horrendous riots across the Liverpool City region and then the wider UK that stemmed from a horrific incident in Southport. And me and my family were targeted amongst the violence, and I think I'd started writing a chapter about the far right. It was an anthology, so it was sort of a quasi academic book, and it was an anthology of activists. So I was in the middle of about to do this chapter, and we sort of paused while the city was burning. And then something happened to my son within all this violence, and we maybe 2 weeks passed, and then we came back to this space to write the rest of the chapter. And it was like the world had changed in between writing the chapter. And part of my research, it was looking at the far right over the past 200 years. And I remember looking at I'm sure you've heard this great replacement theory that is this key issue that the far right are currently rallying around, which is essentially the white Europeans are being replaced by people of colour. And there was actually a French academic, I believe it was, Alain de Bonist, who is believed to have been sort of the foundations of that kind of thinking, although he's never truly aligned with the far right, he's never opposed them using his work. And this was years ago. I think it was almost 50 years ago that his publication came out. And I remember sitting there and thinking, so his work has been, whether willingly or not, used by the far right and is informing some of the most hate-filled narratives that we're seeing that have led, quite often led to violence on the street. How much and we're still defending critical racism, which was critical race theory and things like intersectionality conceptualized around the end of the 20th century that have been really useful to our fight for racial justice. And while the writing academic pieces and the editorial process is brutal and the peer review process is it's a lot, but how important is that work? How important is it to have that body of work for our social justice movement? And nothing is more telling than seeing libraries in this city burn to know the power of words within those books. So for me, that really affirmed my belief of, yes, this is slow work. Yes, my ADHD brain hates it. Yes, I'm sensitive to feedback and I have to have a day to cry before I get on and fix the edit.
Rejection sensitivity is real.
It is. But yes, this is important work and we have to do that alongside the activism. We have to do that alongside the political pushback against this swing to the far right. Every single piece of this puzzle has a place. And so, yeah, I actually ended up finding writing that chapter so empowering, so affirming, and also because we were looking historically able to look at the resistance too. So for me, it felt like this is the first time we've seen this level of violence in my lifetime, but it's not the first time the UK has seen this kind of violence. It's not the first time we've had far right members in in political spaces, maybe not in parliament. It's not the first time we've had riots on the streets, and there has been pushback, and this is how that has happened, essentially through intersectional unity between movements. So it was affirming on so many levels, but for me that really cemented in this work is so important. And I'm not sure. I absolutely love teaching. I absolutely love it. And I love that bit at the end where someone comes up and goes, wow, you've opened my eyes. You've made me think differently about this. And that kind of light bulb moment for students, there's nothing that beats it. But I'm also really keen for the research that I do not to just be something that, gets a publication or gets like a little credit somewhere and then sits on a shelf.
Yeah.
I really want to be taking this into policy spaces and saying, there are young people who are being failed, who continue to be failed by these policy decisions. How can we change that? How can we change our practice so that we're serving these young people and improving educational outcomes? So I do feel like there will always be a practical element to my academic trajectory, and I do think that's just my vibe. I like to be active. I like to be in practical spaces. I like to be on the ground more than in a lovely air conditioned office writing things.
Yeah, I totally relate to that, which is why people kept asking me, why do you keep doing like basically PhD after PhD? Because all my research projects were very much like on the ground, going out and doing it myself. I might have helpers, right? But like, it wasn't just like, I'll sit in the office writing grants and papers and you guys go out and do the work. It was like, no, I want to be there. So it was like, I almost would have rather just be a PhD student all my life or just do postdocs or something, although I don't really like taking orders, so probably not. Yeah, I love what you said about like, I can't remember the words that you used, but these, like movements that run in parallel within different disciplines or different, kind of industries that then have a lot of like overlap. I'm also thinking about the work that you've done to understand different international parallel movements as well. I just visited Peru a few weeks ago and took loads of photos of the memorial of like basically a big genocide that happened like into the 90s, and almost every former president of Peru has gone straight to jail, which is wow. Don't be a politician there, possibly. But it was interesting how much the universities were taken over through these far right shifts and genocidal language, and the universities were part of it. And it was something like 30% of the people that were in the political system that was far right and creating all this violence. 30% of them had degrees, which in the regular population was like 5% or something like this, right? So I think, I know that you traveled, are you making those kind of connections on like what other people are doing across the world, either in academic spaces, research spaces, or with your activism, or both?
Yeah, so recently in May, so the book that I contributed to, I should have given it a plug, I'm going to now, it's called Liberation Stories. It's out, I think, in August in the UK.
Liberation Stories.
Yes, and there's currently a tour in America because it's been released in America already. And this was a book where globally a load of activists contributed to it, and we all put chapters in about different liberation struggles. So there's things about the Palestinian struggle, there's things about the far right. There's a few chapters about the far right, but different struggles from different spaces. And then we were fortunate enough to a lot of us come together in New Orleans in May for a conference. And the conference was about narrative power and essentially pushing back against a lot of the stuff you've described, this far right swing. But the conference was very much under the current regime, I can only describe it as. So we had to have extra security briefings about safety going over to America. Some people didn't make it because of the visa restrictions were changing. We were very aware that academics were being pulled over and sent back because of their ideologies, and ideologies meaning like they opposed violence against women and they were left or socialist, and how dangerous it was to even just go over there and have a conversation. Not everyone in the space was academics, although I'd say, there was probably a larger proportion than average, but there were a lot of activists in the space. And I think a lot of the conversations were very pertinent to the things that academics do contribute to. Ooh, I'll have to turn my light back on.
Yeah.
It might be better this way, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But it was it was essentially, how do we fight the far right narrative? And the far right narrative, as you have alluded to, is coming from a space sometimes of academia, is also coming from a space of a well-funded far right media. And the left have been pushed into this reactionary space of just reacting. And this was, how do we shape the narrative? How do we get our narrative out there? And how do we work increasingly in a digital media space? And they are conversations that are so pertinent to everything that's happening now, especially in places like Liverpool. So while it was really interesting to hear about different struggles in different places, especially America, like, it was really interesting to hear about the situation with insurance companies over there, who will essentially preemptively cancel insurance if they think a natural disaster is going to happen and leave people homeless. It was so interesting to see how similar it was to what was happening in different spaces, especially the far right shift, and how easily that could be, the UK within a few years especially. So it was really powerful conversations, but the big thing that I took home was, how do we create our own narrative, and how do we get that narrative out there? And that's something we've been thinking about as anti-racists and also as activists, and just being in the space and being like, how do we counter this misinformation? How do we do so in a way that's academically sound and fact-checked, but also accessible? And that was a big part of the conversation, something that I feel is so relevant in every space, especially academia. I feel like, and I'd be really interested to know your thoughts about this, language is so complex in left spaces, but also in academic spaces, unnecessarily complex. Yeah. And while it affirms how clever we all are and how amazing we all are, it alienates huge portions of the population who we're trying to reach, and whose lived realities we're trying to change and improve, and who we're trying to engage and work in partnership with. We're always having this conversation about, we need to make our language more accessible, while speaking to each other in the same language and reinforcing this academic language. And it's like, is anyone going to actually speak in an accessible way and make these spaces, like, make them accessible for people? Yeah. And so that is something that we're hoping to work really hard on in some of the comms that we want to put out, make it accessible, because that's something that the far right have done very well. It's easy when you're just peddling in lies, but they've just broke it down to like 3-word messaging. Yeah. Stop the vote, get Brexit done, make America great again, if you want to add a 4th word. They've just broke these huge concepts down, these really easy to engage with messages, because everybody's busy. And then people have kind of taken it and run with it. But the left, we still over-explain things. Academic spaces, it's so complex, and it's like, how can we make this accessible for people? Because that's how you reach people. You don't alienate them from the space. You don't make them feel like they're unwelcome in the space, but you welcome them in, and you welcome them in from a space of common understanding.
Yes. Yeah. And it's our academics answer to questions when we go, well, it depends, and because we don't have like a 3-word, kind of slogan. And also, when I was doing a lot of public engagement work, which was the part that I really loved doing, and it was probably part of the activism, or getting like information out there to get more practical, giving teachers, kind of practical advice. I noticed that a lot of times, if I told my personal story or somebody else's personal story, it definitely resonated a lot more and made a bigger impact in the space than definitions and our here's the history, and this is what we're kind of, this is where our thought is evolving. It was they wanted not only answers that were easy to understand, but it also had an emotional story along with it. And I think the far right does that really, really well. And it's probably something, I mean, we were talking about that the other day when we went for a walk, right? Is like,
Yeah.
what do people want to hear? They want to hear about your lived experience with something, and then forget that you're also have other expertise, that you have other identities. And sometimes,
Yeah.
you know, you're just seen as this story of woe, and we have to, you know, open our wounds in front of people a lot. But I do think that that does, like, you know, people go, ooh, I'm interested in that story. You know, even yesterday I watched a documentary, and it was mainly because of the emotional story that I wanted to watch it, not because of the investigative reporting that was behind it, which obviously they also put in some statistics, right? But it was the emotional, like, this one person's story. Ooh, okay, I want to listen. So yeah, I think a lot of but you probably know that in terms of your activism as well, you know, those personal stories that are really important when you're fighting any fight. The
Yeah,
George Floyd,
definitely.
right? Like, or and then they use the Southport thing to go, oh, okay, this
Yeah.
is a story, and this is the story we're telling. This is the narrative we're telling. But I don't know how you get that down to a 3 word.
No, and it is, and it's also like, how do we tell a story without sort of dealing in trauma, as in using trauma in a really transactional way.
Yeah.
Something that we've stuck with since we created our anti-racist groups and movements has always been not to share these. You know, you see videos, you can very easily see videos of people dying and just horrific graphic violence. We just don't believe that you need to see the worst of humanity in order to engage in a key issue. So it's, how can you stay true to that without sort of engaging in this transactional trauma in order to shock people into action? Because quite often it's not always long-term action, and that's the other part of the you know, the far right narrative. Quite often it's to get you to take a specific action, and that action can be to vote, or it can be to go out and be part of a protest or riot. But what we're trying to create is long-term change, a long-term social shift. So
Yeah.
we want people to engage with these issues deeply and not reactionally, and also not be so traumatized that they then have to step back because it's all too much. So I do think finding a way to engage people doesn't always mean free words, although if we can find a free word slogan, that
Yeah.
would be boss. But I find a way to engage with people in an accessible way, and in a way that is sustainable, and encourage them to be part of movements in a long-term way.
Yeah, I wonder also, one asset of academia is, you know, I would sit down with, like, I would do peer coaching, and we would sit down together and figure out, like, our 10-year plan for our research, right? And where it was going to go, who it was going to impact, how it was going to impact them, how we were going to ensure that it continues stable with funding, da 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 da. And it had a kind of, like, hope to it, because it was like, we're going to reduce violence, you know, with, you know, bystander interventions or whatever it is. And we had, like, a clear thing of who we needed to be involved. And I wonder if those kinds of strategies of, like, this is our 10-year plan could be used by more leftist movements, because I feel like if they are reactionary, then they're just about, we need to take down that message in the next few months, right? But if you
Yeah.
have a vision of, like, you know, people, this is the world that we want in 10 years. Don't you want that for your children? I mean, it's a language of hope, right? It's a language of this is a vision that we have. And I think a lot of people see leftist movements and go, but there's no vision. What's the overall, like, vision for the future that I can get behind and feel like I will get behind that with all my empowerment?
Honestly, I absolutely agree. I think it's difficult though to vision when funding cycles are usually 6 months to 3 years. So I feel like people are so, you know, funding cycle and short-term orientated around the instability within social justice spaces. But that ability to say, okay, what is the world we're fighting for? How can we model it, and how can we dream it? Because if we can't even dream it and be creative enough to conceptualize it, then how can we bring people in? So I do think it's a key part of the fight, being able to say, okay, what does a world where we have a sufficient social safety net that people aren't choosing between heating and eating, look like? What does a world where everything isn't being blamed on migrants and we're actually looking at where tax is going or not going, who is and isn't being taxed, tax the rich? What does a world where we do that look like? And what does a world where we put maybe health and wellness before the bottom line of organisations? What does that world look like? Let's think that up.
Absolutely. I love that because, it's like when you put a dream to somebody, I feel like that's what then propels you forward for each day that you come home from work and you don't have time for going on a march. Do you know what I mean? I feel like people are led to working so hard and then taking care of their families that you don't have a free moment, right? Especially the gig economy where you're supposed to then have like you're maybe an Uber driver, but you're also a this and you're also a that. It's like that takes away the time that you could actually be going out and, talking to your politicians. Doesn't have to be revolution, but, could be just even going out and speaking to people. It takes away your time and your ability to do that, plus keeps you isolated and not in your social environment to hear that other people are having these same thoughts and these same dreams.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I do wonder why, if that's part of the reason why they got us back to work so quickly in the middle of a global pandemic. They were like, oh, they'll riot if they've got too much time on their hands. Get them back to work.
Yes. I think there was a podcast by Taylor Lorenz, I suppose. I think that's who it was, that talked about that, about how much during the pandemic everybody was helping each other. I remember buying onions for somebody. Like, I was like, yeah, I'm going to the supermarket later to buy a 10-kilo bag of rice, so I'll get you like a bag of onions, right?
But that's like one of the interesting things about it. Everyone was going to this like post-apocalyptic vision of the world where the social structures of society would fall and so would democracy and everything. But actually, when people did have more time, and during that period where people were being paid for a short while, you actually saw more of humanity. You saw more of people looking out for each other. You saw a lot of mutual aid. You saw a lot of support. Obviously, it didn't always extend to toilet roll, but you did see a lot of community activism taking place. So you actually, it was, I mean, for me, there's two sides of the lockdown. There's the pre-George Floyd and post-George Floyd. But there was almost this kind of utopian rose-tinted community aspect of the before June part of it, before May part of it, and you would go out, and it reminded me of growing up in the 90s, especially being in Halewood, because you'd go out and you'd see your neighbours and you'd have time to say, how are you? Like, I don't even have time to say, how are you to my neighbour? I'm like, hi, as I'm running into the car with coffee and files and just like, oh, and that's it. And you have time to engage with the community and be like, oh, hey, we've been neighbours for 10 years. I don't know your name. Hi. So yeah, that's what emerged more.
It's so true. And then also that governments were going, oh, if you need to be furloughed, you'll still get paid. And so you're going, oh, wait, so you could actually help people. So why haven't you been, or the fact that they were able to, find housing for homeless and, all these things that they were able to do. And you're just I think a lot of people had a little light bulb moment of like, there is money for this. It's a choice. So I think that maybe that's when they went, oh gosh, they've figured it out.
And also that shift that we had around wellness and around how little organisations care for us. So a lot of people were like, how quickly people lost their jobs as well, and how quickly people were furloughed. I don't think we've got back to that grind culture before COVID of I'm going to work myself to death for this organisation. I think people are like, boundaries, and people are very aware of how precious health is now. So I've not seen that level of compromisation anymore of people's health for a job. People are very much, I'm taking leave, I'm having time off, I'm switching off, I'm just putting me first. So I like aspects of who we are since we've emerged from COVID.
Yeah. I mean, what is your sense of what you'd like to do after you get your PhD? What's the plan then? Do you have a plan, or are you just seeing like where this takes you and making networks and creating little steps that then might lead to something?
I mean, I've been following the vibes for 5 years, and it's kind of led me here. Like, I didn't think I'd be on an academic path. It's just where activism took me. I enjoy a lot of the things I do, so I am very much having really engaged conversations with people like, "Hey, what do you do with your PhD?" And it's really interesting to learn what people do because there's so many different routes outside of the university walls. There's people who are freelance researchers, people who do contractual work, people who work for amazing charity sector orgs, and just brilliant work, and also like digital nomads who I'm really interested in at the moment. So it's really interesting learning about it all, but as well as just loving teaching. Like, it's so lovely to teach and to be able to be in that position. I think it's a privilege to be in that position and to be able to support people in that along that learning journey. So I'm very much open to exploring at the moment, but literally top of my list is just finish the PhD because I've just finished all my field work and I've got all my themes, and I'm like, the only thing stopping me now is me. And I am good at that as well. So I'm like, just write it. So at summer of writing, you're not going to see me out. You're not going to see me on the street. You're just going to see me in the library, head down, writing the thing.
Yes. And I mean, do you have like really good methods of like completing it? Because I just heard from somebody, I think it was my client yesterday, we were on a meeting, and she was like, I just heard that, when you have like 5 things on your to-do list, you're most likely you're going to do 3 of them. And so then you end up feeling bad that you haven't done all 5. So actually we should just be putting 3 things rather than, more and more on our to-do list for each day. And I was like, oh yeah, I think I learned that like a long time later, like maybe when I was 45 or something like this, way later than I probably should have been learning these things. But yeah, I mean, yeah, breaking it down, putting like enough that you definitely will do it, and making it very detailed, like 3 paragraphs of my this chapter or whatever, like making it so concrete. That's it. Do you already have these kind of things in place?
No, the ADHD is my Achilles heel. So before I met with you, I had a meeting with my supervisor, and I was like, I need you to give me hard deadlines. I was like, hard deadlines and constant accountability is what I need.
Yes.
Because right now, like even with the interviews, there was always that, I've got to get back to people. There's accountability, but now we're back in the ether of it's just up to me to do it. And there's so many shiny things out there that I love to do, that I'm really like, so I basically blocked my whole diary for August, and I'm having more meetings with my supervisor and being like, this is what I'm going to do, and just trying to make myself accountable. And then I'm going to be going away for a few little, it's sort of holidays, sort of writing retreats where I'll be somewhere where I can go and do paddleboarding, but I can also be within a space where I can reach my book on my laptop. So it's sort of like interval academia, like read, write, paddleboard, read, write, paddleboard, and just trying to do that because I know the way my brain works, and I do. The ADHD means I can have really intense sessions of writing, like. I can write for 12 hours and then be like, oh, I'm really hungry and I need the toilet, and my tummy's hurting, and forget all of that. And then I'll be like, where's a tree? Because I've not seen nature. So I try to break it up with nature walks and trying to not fall into burnout. So I'm going to be stricter with myself this summer, but while also engaging with nature and having that little bit of wellness sewn in.
Yes. With one of my PhD students, we had a shared calendar. So all the like deadlines would be for both of us, to see. So it was really nice to do it that way. Yeah, definitely. You'll get it done. I mean, I wish that I knew that I was fighting against, or like my deadline was up against the flood that hit New Orleans. But I didn't know that was coming, except that I did finish and was out of the city like less than a month before Hurricane Katrina hit, and I was actually on the plane to my postdoc when it was hitting, and I was at the airport still with people like urging them to get out and saying, I don't care how you get out, but you really need to get out. And I know that we evacuated for the last like 5 of them and nothing ever happened, not even like a freaking wind, but like you can't play around with this, and Yeah, it was insane. But I mean, I think when
Wow.
you have like a postdoc, it also puts kind of a deadline on it where you're like, oh, okay, well, I definitely have to do this before I move to Sweden, like halfway across the world. But yeah, other than that, I think like supervisors giving you deadlines, so good. Um,
Definitely.
yes, you'll get it. You'll get it. By Christmas, we'll be celebrating.
Oh, the quicker deadline than I was going for, but let's go with it. Let's see what I can get done before Christmas.
um, so this is the time when I like to ask about your any songs that might be a good, because I know that you love music, and so I wanted to ask you about what's on your playlist. Or yeah, it doesn't have to be one song. I think I had one person tell me she just likes soundtracks, so she listed a bunch of like soundtracks that she absolutely loves. But yeah, what's on your playlist right now? What song is really
Well,
inspiring you?
it is interesting that you have just asked that because I literally have again stimmed this song about 100 times since yesterday. So he's called Fuse ODG, and he sang that he was like key in Afrobeats taken off in the UK in like 2012. So
Yeah.
you'll probably know who he is, but he's got some new music out. And one of his new songs is absolutely incredible.
Uh,
It's under his Spirit of Africa album, and it's called Sundiata. And oh my goodness, it like speaks to the power in Africa. It's got colonial elements. It talks about the Democratic Republic of Congo. He's dancing in African beautiful cultural wear outside King's Cross Station, and the
oh, well.
songs on it like there's 45 countries in Africa. Why are you calling it a country? Like it is everything I've heard. I've not got all the way through the album because I only came across it last night, and I've basically
Oh,
been one song that I'm obsessed with, but I'm going to listen to the rest. But it is he's been doing a lot of incredible stuff. Like he called out Band Aid and has
oh,
called out
wow.
things like the BBC for constantly presenting Africa as a country and one poverty-stricken country when we know it's a vast
Oh,
continent
God.
and there's affluence and there's poverty, and also how that narrative has damaged the tourist industry and almost made it impossible for the continent to create its own wealth and to benefit from those things because it's always positioned as the poor relative, despite the fact that under neo-colonialism there's still a lot of minerals and wealth being drawn out of the continent, but that's another
Exactly.
conversation. So he's really radical, and this song, honestly, Luna, listen to it.
Ah,
I am obsessed. I'm going to send you the reel because,
yes,
like, even
please.
the video of him and all his guys just stood outside King's Cross looking like kings is like, oh my goodness, you will
I
love it.
love that. I'm so excited because I've been kind of obsessing, and that meme that says like I'm gonna listen to this until I hate music. Like I've been
Yeah.
doing that with one song as well, which is Bomba Stereo, but like collab with somebody else, and it's about the earth. Anyway, I'll send it to you. But it's
Yay!
absolutely amazing, and I just keep like, and it's annoying that it's like, I think it's maybe 2 minutes. It's one of those shorter songs, so I just have to keep going, replay, replay. I do it the poor man's way of just pressing with a button with my thumb rather than
Using
like
my thumb
using my thumb. I don't have a thing of like, just keep replaying this over and over again.
until I throw my phone at the wall. It's like just a first world problem there.
But I think I heard a Fuse. I think maybe on Instagram, like ages
Yeah.
ago.
You
Yeah.
will know him, you will know his songs
Yeah.
100%. But as far he's not come up on my radar for a while,
Yeah.
which is why I was like, oh hey, new music. Yes, so Antenna and Million Pound Girl, do, do, do. I'm not gonna sing, but you will know him 100%.
Yeah.
But this is like, oh my goodness, King. And I don't know if
Ah.
you've seen, I don't know if the DJ is called, there's like a street DJ who he likes DJs outside one of the tube stations, and then like random celebrities like pop up and do a little beat and do a
Oh.
little DJ set. There was like a really cringe one of Will Smith when no one was dancing, and then Fuse is there, and like the whole area is bopping, and I'm like, I love him. I know he's doing a show next week, and honestly, I'm having to stop myself from just booking a ticket and going to see him, but I'm not going to because I'm
Where is it?
really.
London or?
It is, it's London. It's very tempting. But no, PhD, Luna,
Yes.
PhD.
Yes. Did I see your poetry being made into a song as well?
Yes, yes, it was. I wrote a poem about the climate emergency, and I didn't actually think anyone, I just put it on my social media, and then this music producer was like, hey, I think this is amazing. Can I put it over a song? And then it was like, yeah, it was played on the BBC, and then all these like journalists wrote about it. And I was like, wow. So I've got a songwriting credit.
I just hit my microphone. I'm so excited for you. I heard part of it and I was like, "Ooh, where can I get this? I love it. It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
It's so good."
It's on Spotify. I actually don't even know the name of the song because he called it like a random name, but it is on Spotify. Let me see if I can figure out what he called it. The guy is called See How. He's really, really cool, and I'm sure this isn't very like promotion-y because I don't know what the song is called, ADHD. But let me tell you what I know what the song is called. It is called 422 ppm. I don't know if that means anything to anyone, but look for 422 ppm on Spotify and you'll hear part of my poem.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So you're a creative writer, an academic writer, an activism writer. Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
Basically, I like to write things.
That's amazing. I need you on my team because I hate to write.
Hey, we could make a dream team. It would be amazing.
Absolutely. As soon as you get your PhD, I'm going to find out how we can work together.
I'm there. This is even more motivation to finish my PhD. I'm going to work with Luna at the top of my vision board and then do my PhD.
Oh, I'm so honored. I absolutely love having you on here. And yeah, where can people find you? Where on socials or yeah?
So you can find me all over social media. I'm either Chantelle Lunt or at Chantelle_Lunt for my personal social media, which is very separate to my political social media, which I haven't updated for a while. But that's Councillor Lunt, my political social media. I'm kind of active on all platforms, but the least active on X for obvious reasons. And I'm slowly building a Blue Sky presence. So find me, connect, say hi. And LinkedIn, I'm on there too, but I don't really know what I'm doing other than being super corporate and positive about life. So yeah, if you want positive corporate Chantelle, find me on LinkedIn too. #Councillor Lunt.
I think your BBC interview or debate with somebody police-wise, I think was on LinkedIn. I saw it on there. I was like, yes, this belongs on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I always just sprinkle in a little bit of activism just to see what it does to them. I'm like, hey, here's me arguing with a police officer.
What you think?
I know.
I'm always engaging with it though. I'm like, oh, engagement.
Luna's me little star. I'm like, hey!
I'm like, I gotta give a comment and a like.
Thank you.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.